Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Monday, August 12th, 2013, start of a brand new week, almost halfway through the month. Just a reminder that Ben Swan is going to be on our show tomorrow talking about his new media venture, breaking free of corporate media and getting out there and staying on mission to get the information to the American people they need to have to make good choices, with the ultimate goal that we all share of restoration of the Republic. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. The jury has just this moment come back with a verdict in the Whitey Bulger case. They found him guilty of racketeering and conspiracy. I know there's another 30 charges they're waiting to hear on that one, but for those of you who are following that story, a lot of people thought he might actually get off when some of the important witnesses against him seemed to run into very unfortunate, tragic mishaps, so forth and so on. Now, as of today, Monday, all of the foreign U.S. embassies that were closed because of the so-called al-Qaeda terror threat between last week and the end of the month are not open, with the exception of Yemen, because the U.S. is now drone striking all kinds of people in Yemen who have this picky attitude of resenting drone strikes. So that embassy is still closed, but all of them are reopened. Remember last week, terror plot, have to close the embassies all over that part of the world until the end of the month, and they're open today, which basically means is this latest White House daily dose of booga booga has cratered. Nobody bought the idea that 20 al-Qaeda leaders got onto a conference call using a phone system everybody knows is monitored by the NSA, and then they tried to up the ante with that exploding clothes story, which just made the whole propaganda stunt look silly, look like a farce. So contrary to the warnings about the embassies would be closed to the end of the month, they're all back open and business is back to normal, and the White House is now looking for the next big scare they can wave at us. We had one over the weekend over at JFK International Airport. There was a package that supposedly sickened two workers in the mail processing facility. Package from China. From China. Was all over the place. Chinese package at JFK tested positive for VX nerve gas. And it got a lot of headlines until the New York Fire Department came back and said that first simple test that they use there on the ground in the mail handling, it's subject to false positives. And it'll say positive for VX for very, very benign, non-harmful contents, and that's what happened. And so the fire department said subsequent tests showed no, there was no nerve gas in this package, and the story just simply vanished. All right, we're going to take a real quick phone call here. Keith in Montana. Aloha, Keith. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, good morning, Mike. Hey, Mike, I just wanted to say this real fast. I sent you a video clip of, it's a kind of a long video there, but it's about these salmon and stuff. You remember last year when they dropped all that 100 tons of that uranium ore oxide, what they call it, off of the coast of British Columbia there?
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, all these fish, massive salmon also like are dying and stuff like that over there, and it's a video well worth watching there because it shows
you're talking about the ones where the fish have just got all these horrible bleeding lesions and tumors all over, and they're basically suffering from radiation sickness. And
I was just going to say, though, the fact is the Canadian government is hiding so much, but it shows that the area where the stuff was dropped, how it gets into the entire stream, where the fish have to pass through that area. And
well, it's not just passing through it. I mean, the radioactivity is in the water. Organisms will eat it. It's a process called bioaccumulation, especially bottom feeders will be, like crabs and lobsters, will be picking that up. Then the little fish get eaten by the larger fish, and they ingest this material, and it basically stays in them. And so it actually tends to concentrate in the seaweed plants, in the plankton, and in the ocean life, and we're seeing the results. And just to cut the people who dump that ore a little bit of slack, the area off Washington State has been used by the United States Navy for testing their depleted uranium munitions for a lot of years, and that stuff goes in the ocean. And the attitude is, hey, it's necessary for the war. We've got to win the war on terror. We've got to win the war on that part of the world that won't support private central banking. And if it comes ashore, it's no big deal. We're seeing that same attitude right now, even as Fukushima is acknowledging that hundreds and hundreds of tons of highly contaminated radioactive water is pouring into the Pacific Ocean. The FDA last week came out with another announcement. Hey, nothing to worry about. We'll test fish if we need to, but otherwise we're just going to proclaim that it's all safe for you to eat. And that, of course, is complete and absolute nonsense. The complete disdain for the public health displayed by the nuclear industry and the nuclear war machine, it's just shocking and frightening. And I'm sure somewhere in the back there's a little deal. Hey, if they get cancer, that'll help our buddies with the cancer treatment centers make more money. It's all about stimulating the economy by making sure that everybody is chronically ill.
Yeah. One other thing I noticed about that movie there, where the one guy that was trying to derail all the investigations there, where he had sent that fish in from his own freezer, but they said that they had to send it clear over to Norway to get it tested because they would refuse the labs to work on it over here, you know. But that even his fish tested positive for what I guess they call it fish AIDS or something like that, you know. But it goes to show you the amount of how they're trying to stop the information of that getting out, and that's why the reason I wanted to call you there. But that's about it there. Enjoy the show, okay?
All right, thanks an awful lot. I'm not sure enjoy the show is a good comment. We're basically here trying to get information out to people who need to have it. There are mass fish die-offs going on all over the planet, a lot of them in the enclosed water spaces, lakes, streams, ponds, seem to be related to oxygen depletion caused by methane bubbling up from underneath from all the fracking, and again in areas where radioactive waste or radioactive weapons are being dumped. There seem to be problems coming from that. For a government that is constantly haranguing us about the environment in terms of carbon dioxide, they show a complete reckless disregard for the long-term consequences of their actions right now. And that is very alarming. I mean, when you're talking about this radioactive material, that's the gift that keeps on giving. It'll be causing problems for hundreds, in some cases thousands of years. Depleted uranium's half-life is something like 4.5 billion years. It does not go away. There's a new call for the World Health Organization to start actually listing and categorizing all of the tremendously horrible birth defects that are being seen in places like Iraq, where the U.S. is using these depleted uranium munitions. And it's not just the Iraqis. There is a huge problem with severe birth abnormalities among the families of our returning veterans. They go over to the war zone, they get exposed to this depleted uranium, they come back, they start a family, and their kids are born horribly deformed, and talk about a cruel punishment for service to your country. And that's another story that doesn't seem to get a lot of play in the corporate media, because it might actually discourage people from signing up for the military if they understand that the price of serving their country in these war zones is they're never going to be allowed to have healthy children. So anyway, in the midst of all of this, of course, Congress is now on vacation. Huge bunch of them are over in Israel being told what to do to the American people for the next couple of years. The Obama family is on Martha's Vineyard. My deepest sympathies to people on Martha's Vineyard. I know what a pain it is when Obama comes out here to Oahu for his vacations. Little side note, this is actually being reported in the foreign press. This was in the Telegraph. The first dog, Bo, got his ride to Martha's Vineyard separately on an MV-22 Osprey. This is the Marine Corps aircraft, the tilt-rotor aircraft that takes off and lands like a helicopter but can fly like an airplane. Very expensive airplane, and they took one and just used it to give the dog a ride up to Martha's Vineyard. And it's something to keep in mind the next time you hear Obama or even Michelle talking about austerity, about how everybody has to make cuts because we've got to save those poor, struggling, suffering bankers. So the first dog gets a free ride in a V-22 Osprey. We're going to take a break for some commercials. I know we got another caller waiting on the line, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take another phone call. Nana up in Idaho. Aloha, Nana. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I was just making a comment because you just made a comment earlier about the fracking and the gases out of the ocean. What
Yes.
about all the sinkholes that are happening?
Yeah, that's another
That people
major
have-
problem that we're seeing. Whether it is just people were foolishly building on unstable geology, or we've been seeing that actually over in Long Beach, California, for a lot of years. As they pump out more of the oil, the land is starting to sink. Of course, the global warmers are saying, see, the oceans are rising, the oceans are rising. But no, there's been a big problem over in Southern California. As they pump out the oil in the ground settles down a little bit. I think the sinkhole story is about to gain a little bit more notoriety because apparently a sinkhole just opened up at one of the estates near Walt Disney World. And
the hotel.
It's starting to take the hotel down. And the issue has to be, we know these sinkholes, not the one at Disneyland, but some of these other sinkholes that have been collapsing were being used for storage of toxic waste. And these are basically these ancient salt domes that are partly hollowed out, but any moisture that goes in there is going to dissolve more salt and weaken those domes. So there is definitely something going on there.
I just feel that we've been hearing more about it since fracking's been going on, whether it's two or two to put together. But I know in my lifetime, I've only heard a lot of it in the last 8 months.
Well, again, it is entirely possible. This idea that the fracking fluid stays down in the oil strata has already been completely disproven. We know that these chemicals, some of which are actually used in chemical weapons in war, it's percolating up, it's getting into the drinking water, and again, these underground salt domes that form these sinkholes, if these chemicals are getting in there, the same chemicals that are used to dissolve the oil-bearing shale, if they're getting into the salt domes, they're going to dissolve those as well, and you're going to start having more and more of these collapses.
Well, I'll let you go, brother. You're doing an excellent job. I love you, and I just thought I'd put a thought out there.
All right. Well, it's certainly it's something that should be looked into, but of course it won't be. Not under this current government. All right, then. Now, before we went to the break, we were talking about how the first dog, Bo, got airlifted to the Obama holiday home on Martha's Vineyard using an MV-22 Osprey, which is a very expensive piece of military kit. And we should all remember this the next time Barack and Michelle are going on about how important it is for all of us to live simpler lives so those poor, struggling, suffering money junkies can have a little bit more. And even so, I'm sure Bo's flight cost a lot less than what it cost the United States to hire Russia to take an American astronaut to the space station, because it just got a lot worse. Russia just tripled the price they will charge the National Aeronautics and Space Administration to fly a U.S. astronaut to the space station. So if you're an astronaut and you were training to go to the space station, you probably just lost your seat, because now for the cost that NASA used to pay to send 3 astronauts up to the space station, they're only going to get 1. And my guess is they're not going to have the money to they're going to have to cut corners. And so basically what it comes down to is, here we are with Barack Obama, the first United States president to preside over a nation without a manned space program since Eisenhower, making us dependent on Russia to reach the space station. Then Obama throws this tantrum over Snowden, snubs Putin for the G20, insults the Russians, who decide they really aren't all that happy carrying Americans into space anymore, and decide they're going to charge a nuisance fee, tripling the cost. Well played, Obama. Well played. Very well thought out and planned. This is the price of his tantrums. Now, speaking of the G20, as you're probably already aware, Barack Obama has decided he will refuse an invitation to meet with Vladimir Putin when the G20 meets in St. Petersburg. And by the way, that is a major diplomatic slap in the face when you are in somebody's country hosting a conference or a meeting, and the head of state of that host country invites you for a meeting. It is considered a major diplomatic faux pas to turn them down. And Obama basically turned him down, snubbed him supposedly over the Edward Snowden affair. Now, I think Obama was looking for a reason to duck a meeting with Putin anyway, because Putin basically cleaned Obama's clock for him during their previous meeting regarding Syria and Iran. Looking at the photo of both their faces after the meeting, it was obvious it did not go well at all. Obama is trying to bully Russia, and Russia understands they're holding all the cards right now in the world. They've got an economy that's working. Their balance of trade is just one of the best in the world right now compared to the United States, which is one of the worst in the world. By the way, little side factoid I just found out looking at an article. We always talk about the United States being the richest nation on earth, and technically it's true, but all that wealth is concentrated in the hands of the 1%. If you judge the wealth of a nation by the wealth of the average household, the United States is not number one. China is. As measured by the wealth of ordinary working families, China is the wealthiest nation on earth. Little side note. So what's going on at the G20 where Obama is trying to keep the media focus on Putin and Edward Snowden? Well, it seems like the focus of this G20 is going to be moving the world to a stronger international currency, meaning anything but the U.S. dollar. And apparently Russia has been warning its citizens and institutions since March's Cyprus bail-in to start getting out of the Western banks and Western stock market. They understand it's all being rigged. And this, of course, is a huge flow of real wealth out of the American financial system, which is why they're trying to prop it all up with fraud. But it looks like the G20's primary agenda is going to be ending the reign of the dollar. And Obama doesn't know what he's going to do to distract Americans from that. But clearly the agenda of the G20 is to take away the dollar's status as the dominant reserve international trade currency. Not that it still is anyway. We've got China has made agreements with 8 nations for direct currency swaps without going through the dollar. The BRICS are setting up their own international trade currency. More and more countries are turning away from the dollar faster than we can reconquer them and force them back on the dollar. They can't win this one. They've already lost it. This war to dollarifize the world, to return the world back to Bretton Woods, they've already lost it. But they won't give up out of a sense of misplaced ego and pride, and we're still number one, and we're not. We're very much not. Now, over the weekend, we saw some interesting stories in the corporate media about how Obama's approval ratings near all-time lows. And they basically came out with a Gallup poll saying the president was at 41% approval. And Real Clear Politics put the number at 43.6%. But, you know, this is a little piece of propaganda to say, yeah, people don't approve of Obama, but almost half of them still do. We ran our own poll at whatreallyhappened.com, and we got a 3% approval rating for Barack Obama's performance and work, probably all coming from the various NSA, FBI, Mossad people who lurk in the site to find out what it is that we're saying and doing. But it was only 3%. And that is pretty bad. I think Bo the First Dog probably gets a higher approval rating than Barack Obama does, even with his obvious luxury ride on the V-22 Osprey. Now, a story coming out of the Washington Times, Obama has done too little too late to fix the surveillance programs. He's had 5 years to address what is clearly a violation of the Constitution. He claims to be a constitutional law professor, although that claim now appears to be false. We'll be back with more of this after these words from our sponsors. America, welcome back to the show. And I want to make a comment about that last commercial that you heard, especially the part where this is a good resource for GMO-free food. Because as time goes on and more evidence continues to surface, despite a massive political, financial, public relations campaign by the providers of these GMO products, it is clear that there are dangers with this experimentation with DNA. There are already known dangers, and the concern is the unknown ones, because it's becoming obvious these large corporations do not look for problems. They're going through the motions to try and be able to say, hey, this is safe for you to use. Look at what the PR disaster just hit the manufacturers of the Gardasil vaccine, where they're now having to admit that it's killed a lot of girls it has been given to. It has sterilized large numbers more by literally destroying their reproductive organs, their ovaries. And then we find out they didn't actually bother to test for these kinds of toxic effects because, hey, if you go looking for a problem and you find one, then we can't sell the product and make lots and lots of money. So if you go to providers of GMO foods and you start buying GMO foods, if you go to your supermarket and you look for, there are some labels that say GMO-free, the USDA's certified 100% organic means there is no GMO in it, at least as of right now. They may change the rules. Monsanto is literally lobbying the government right now to have GMO foods declared to be natural and hence qualify under the organic label. And it's a complete fraud. But if you, using your wallet, focus on non-GMO, eventually those supermarket chains are going to get the message. They'll get the message. They'll go non-GMO. They'll start supporting the idea of labeling rather than risk losing business, because I know most people who are concerned with GMO food right now, if there's doubt, they won't buy the product. They're looking at a product. They can't find any labeling one way or the other. They're saying better safe than sorry. They're putting it back on the shelf. Now, getting back to the NSA surveillance and the commentary coming out that Obama has done too little too late, there's a lot of commentary regarding last Friday's press conference in which Obama promised to have tighter controls and greater transparency over the NSA spying on Americans that only the previous Tuesday he had told Jay Leno did not exist. And from this, obviously we know that he is simply saying whatever he thinks you want to hear to lull you back to a false sense of privacy so you don't start using your own forms of encryption and offline data storage to protect the privacy of your business information from government agencies who provably will steal it to give it to political cronies, like they were caught doing at the Seattle APEC. And if you start doing that, it makes it harder for the NSA to keep an eye on you. So Obama's going to say, oh, we're going to tone it back. We promise we will never do it again. They've been doing it since 1985 to keep eye on all you serfs, because we know they don't actually find real terrorists or real criminals who have the resources to develop their own systems of communication and encryption. So don't buy it at all. Meanwhile, Glenn Greenwald is certainly becoming quite a figure around the globe. He was down in Brazil testifying to their Senate about how the NSA has been targeting Brazil and Latin America for spying and surveillance. And they're not happy about it any more than the American people are. And as a result, John Kerry, who's down in Brazil and Colombia trying to sort of patch things up, has received a very, very chilly reception. People are angry at the arrogance and effrontery of any government listening to their phone calls and reading their emails. And they're very, very upset. We've been hearing propaganda for months now about how, China is the big international espionage, and China's off the hook. The United States is now seen as the biggest threat to data and personal privacy on planet Earth. Over at Activist Post, Stephen Lindman is putting out this information about how the nations of the European Union have been a key NSA target. And obviously the European Union is not a terror threat to the United States of America. They're targeting European businesses to get information useful to American businesses in negotiations and bidding. They're not targeting criminals and terrorists. They're targeting political dissidents. They're targeting owners of businesses. They're targeting the people in foreign banks, trying to get any information to use to try and sway the economy back under the control of the United States of America. And now the whole world knows it. By the way, for those of you using the cloud to back up your smart devices, you are giving your Wi-Fi password to the NSA. There was an article that came out here in ArsTechnica.com talking about how the Android backups, which back up to the cloud, include your Wi-Fi password from your smart device. And that is also true, of course, of iPhone and iPad, which through iTunes are now backing your system up to the cloud unless you explicitly tell it local storage only. And even then, I wouldn't trust it. We have that Apple patent application where they're going to literally build in remote controls to your smartphones and tablets camera system to allow the police and government to remotely disable them. So if you're going out to the Occupy protests and you see the police clubbing protesters on the head, and you take your smartphone to take a picture and all of a sudden it stops working, that's what's going on here. The government is trying to backdoor literally the entire society. So if you are a person who wants to document police abuse, you need to basically, I know it's very convenient having it in your smartphone, but you got to have another camera. A little point and shoot that doesn't have Wi-Fi. The Luxi Cam, the little Bluetooth headset, and by the way, they got a high-def version out now. That is not controllable remotely. But the government is desperate to put their direct digital control into everything you might be using to document government and police abuse. And anybody using the cloud at this point, you are being extraordinarily foolish, because it allows the government and even the company that owns the cloud to go through your data, looking for your business secrets, looking for your passwords, looking for anything they can blackmail you with. You could have stuff planted on you through the cloud. May not actually be on your computer, but they could put some child porn in your cloud data file and arrest you on that. We've been seeing that going on, where apparently a lot of political dissidents are receiving emails through the Tor mail system, which last week was exposed as having been compromised by the NSA, in order to try and plant child porn on their computers, for which they could then be arrested and publicly humiliated and discredited. Remember, the other side loves to play dirty. They count on you, the American people, being honest and ethical and law-abiding, because it puts you at a disadvantage in the face of a government that is willing to lie, cheat, steal, and kill to accomplish its aims. So, now, last week we were talking about how LavaBit basically shut itself down rather than comply with NSA requests to provide their users' information. Over at mega.co.nz, that's Kim.com's server, which is outside the United States of America, but the fact that it's in New Zealand, I'm not sure that's all that reassuring. But they're stepping into the fray with a new encrypted email service. Now, again, if it's something out in public in wide use, the NSA will have the method. But if everybody is using hundreds and hundreds of different encryption systems, it still multiplies the NSA's work to keep an eye on you. What the NSA wants is push a button and your entire life is on display on their computer screens, like you see in the movies. So a lot of companies are stepping in with security and privacy stuff, but again, the NSA has a long record of playing dirty. They will literally go out to these companies like Crypto AG and bribe the owner of the company vast sums of money to build in backdoors to allow the NSA to read your encrypted traffic without trouble. DES had it, was called the work reduction packet that had your encryption key in it. When they were trying to foist Clipper chip on the American public, it had the law enforcement assistance field, which was the encryption key, which made that whole thing about split key and escrow a complete public relations joke. They didn't need to go to these agencies to get your encryption key because your encryption key was included in the encrypted message. It's all bluff and bluster. The reality is, as we have proven with our NSA challenges, if you code up your own encryption method, the NSA can't break it. And that's the last thing they want you to understand is possible. They're surviving on their image of, we can read anything, we can break anything, we're watching everything. No, they're not. Not against somebody who wants to devote the time to keep their privacy. They are functionally helpless. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, welcome back to our show here. We're going to grab a phone call real quick. Tom in Texas. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Brother Mike, always appreciate your time, bro.
Thank you.
What's on my mind is how they're pushing down our throat Hillary Clinton for 2016 presidential bid.
Oh, and have you seen all the movies and TV shows they're making about her? I think the newest one is called Hillary Dearest.
No, I haven't seen it, and I don't intend to see it. I really don't.
Me neither. I'll go watch an old copy of Your Social Security in action before I watch a TV show about Hillary.
But the one I do remember is, you remember the clip when she was laughing about when they invaded Libya and Gaddafi was assassinated?
I remember seeing it. I'd like to find a link to it again to put it on up there because Hillary is bad news, and I understand Joe Biden is already up in Idaho at a fundraiser, 3 years to go, and they're already campaigning. And I have a little piece of advice for Joe Biden, and that is to remember that politicians who are running against Hillary Clinton have a bad habit of falling out of the sky in small airplanes.
I know, in car wrecks.
Yes.
Yeah, but anyway, if I'm not a computer geek, I'm a mason and a carpenter and a painter and mechanic, and if I could learn how to weld, I'd be more happy. But if some computer geek out there can find that clip of her laughing, Secretary of State, that is so embarrassing to them. I hung my head in shame when I saw that video the first time. And she was laughing about Gaddafi being killed. And if somebody can run a loop on that and tell us this is going to be our next president in 2016, I'm going to.
If we still have a country in 2016, I'm seriously doubt it's going to last that long. But yeah, we need to find that. I mean, it's very obvious the powers that be are pushing her as hard as they can, and the elections will be rigged. The media will be biased, and already the GOP is out there screaming about.
She's shoot in already. It's like a shoehorn.
Yep.
It's already put in there.
Well, anyway, they can almost drop the campaign in the election and simply say she is anointed, hold the coronation, and we'll have Queen Hillary there, the queen of the cattle futures trades. And I'm sure she's picking up all those celebrity endorsements right now from people like Vince Foster. Are you still there, Tom? Oh, Tom dropped. All right. Gosh darn it. Now then, getting back to the NSA, and I know I'm spending a lot of time on this thing, but you should be furious about this. You should be angry. You really should. Now, the latest damage control coming out from the NSA is that only touches 1.6% of the internet traffic. Really, you can go on storing naked pictures of your significant other on the cloud, and there's a 98.4% chance we'll never look at it. What a load of nonsense that is. That's like a burglar coming into your home and stealing your goods and saying it's not really a crime until I start actually selling it or trading it for drugs. The violation of the Fourth Amendment occurs when they take the data. Has nothing to do when they look at it or not. We know the data capacity of that new Utah data center alone is sufficient to record every single phone call, including the content made by every human being on planet Earth for a period of the last 7 years. And that's just one of these data centers across the globe. We even have a brand new one here on Oahu that I'm sure is paying a great deal of attention to me. This idea that the NSA only touches 1.6% of the traffic is just flat-out attempts to lull you back to a false sense of privacy so you won't take steps to secure your communications, to make the NSA's job of keeping a watch on you that much easier. That's what this is all about. There is one and only one way to guarantee the privacy of Americans, and that is to tear down these NSA data centers, sell all those servers out on the surplus market, shut it all down, turn the buildings into low-income housing. But as long as those data centers are standing up there, the NSA will abuse them because they've been doing it nonstop since 1985. By the way, a little reminder here, this is over at the Intel Hub, and again, the U.S. military is caught manipulating online social media, running mass propaganda accounts, and I'm repeating it again to raise the possibility that when we have various blogs that are getting the truth out versus controlled opposition blogs that are trying to act as gatekeepers, those controlled opposition blogs boast huge readerships and high advertising revenues. And yet we know that too is subject to being faked. And these same multiple phony accounts being used to hurl ridicule and abuse into various online blogs can also be used to artificially inflate readership numbers and ad revenues for the government's controlled websites, to swing the online media advertising economy over to them. Is there any reason for them not to do it? Of course not. These are not people of any kind of morality and ethics. Their attitude is win by all costs, win by all means. No matter what you have to do, do it because winning is all that really counts, even if it destroys the United States of America in the process, rather. They've got to win. We've got to win. We've got to watch everything. All righty, let's see. Another phone call. Werner in New Brunswick. Aloha. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Afternoon, Mike. your previous caller, he mentioned Hillary Clinton.
Yes.
And I don't know. I think the people who call themselves Zionist Christians and so on, they better start studying their Bible and look up King Ahab and Queen Jezebel and Naboth's vineyard.
Well, I'll tell you what, the one that curls my hair is I've got an image of Hillary Clinton next to a portrait of Countess Elizabeth Bathory. They look a lot alike in terms of the expression on their face. That worries me greatly. If the eyes are the window to the soul, then we've got really big problems.
And as I say, what happened there to that man Naboth and the whole Queen Jezebel?
Okay. Well, I'm sure people will take your advice and look that up, but we're going to let you go here and get back onto the 21st century here. Let's see, the former head of the NSA, Michael Hayden, has now said that after the next major attack, meaning the next false flag, the U.S. is likely to seize more surveillance powers. So forget all this stuff that you heard from Obama last Friday about tighter controls and greater transparency. They're going to use the next false flag attack to say, see, we have to watch everything. We need more surveillance. We need to watch every single thing that you, the law-abiding American citizen, is doing in order to deter terrorism, which obviously didn't work, has not worked. They even finally came out and said that this claim of this 20 al-Qaeda leaders on a conference call wasn't uncovered by the NSA. It came from a foreign government who shall remain nameless, meaning Israel. We've already proved with our NSA challenge, real criminals and real terrorists have nothing to fear from the NSA because the NSA is all about watching you, keeping you under control, keeping you repressed, keeping you afraid to say or do anything that the government might find offense with. It's political repression. It's not a real law enforcement counter-terror system. It's about keeping you scared that you're being watched. And so far, the reaction I'm seeing among people that I talk to about this is not one of fear, but one of absolute outrage and fury. So whoever thought that this huge NSA spying on everybody was going to tone down the revolutionary rhetoric in this country, it didn't work. It was another in a long series of very bad guesses about what was going to happen. Now, over at 8times.com, they had a story, Vlad the Hammer versus Obama the Wimp. And they're going on and talking about how Obama keeps bringing up this idea that Russia is slipping back to Cold War thinking. And Obama is half right. It is the United States that is trying to drag the world back to a Cold War, because during the Cold War, huge amounts of money for the military-industrial complex. The American people were just brainwashed into wetting themselves when they heard the word commie, and they would do what they were told and throw their children into whatever wars they were told. Those days are gone. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show today. And we had a lot of listeners send in that video of Hillary Clinton just laughing her head off about the Muammar Gaddafi's bloody murder and the fall of Libya because, hey, after all, we got them back on the U.S. dollar and private central banks, and that makes it all worthwhile. We just posted it to whatreallyhappened.com. After the cash cycles, it'll be visible on our main page, and we have to ask the question, is this the kind of mentality we want in the White House, where she's just happy and giggling that we invaded a country over the gold dinar, smashed the place, murdered the head of state, and she's laughing about it? We're going to go to the phones here now. Janet in Florida. Aloha, Janet. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Mike. I wanted your opinion on a person, Catherine Austin Fitts. Are you aware of her?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Over the weekend with Greg Hunter on USA Watchdog, he had her on and he raved about her. And I listened through the video, and I was only wishing that you could have been there sitting alongside her to hopefully counteract the garbage that was coming out of her mouth. I mean, can we have your opinion? Can other people that are aware of her give their opinion? She said that the dollar will never fall. and she talked about they're working on a breakaway economy, old economy, and the old economy is all the entitlements like pensions, which I paid into all my damn life, Social Security, again, since the age of 13 to 66 that I paid in, and that's the old economy. That's going to disappear for this new economy. And she talked about jobs at the same time she was talking about robotics will be big. Well, if you're going to have robotics, you're not going to have a heck of a lot of jobs, in my opinion.
Oh, they'll have jobs. They'll hire one American to watch the other American, and that second American will be hired to watch the first American. Now, if
what do you think of her? What's your opinion? And then I'll hang up and listen to you.
Okay, well, basically, if you go back and you look at her background, she's very obviously a Washington, D.C. Wall Street insider. Served in the Bush administration. She's been involved in all kinds of investment companies. The idea the dollar will always be strong, of course, is a fundamental religious belief of the Church of Private Central Banking. As far as the breakaway economy, I think there's some merit to the idea, because we've seen this at the corporate level, where a large corporation that is in financial trouble will have a subsidiary, and they'll transfer the liabilities of the whole corporation into that subsidiary, transfer the assets back out, then they'll spin that corporation off and say it's a private entity now and we're not connected with it any longer. That corporation goes out of business, taking the losses with it and stiffing the investors and those who held those obligations. Would they do it on a national level? Yeah, I'm sure they're thinking about it. And they're saying, we know a crash is coming inevitably. Let's be prepared to let it happen. Have the crash take out all the obligations against the government and the corporation. Meanwhile, the assets are moved over to whatever we're going to set up in its place. And I'm sure they're thinking that. But for the American people, the idea of dollar version 2 and a continuance of the same economic system, I don't think is going to be an easy sell, because most Americans like yourself are going to view this collapse of the economy and the ending of their Social Security and their pension funds and the rest of it as the ultimate betrayal by the system as a whole. And they're going to want a new system, not just a new variation on a theme proffered by the same people who set up the last system. And as I said before, when the big crash happens, there's going to be no end of carpetbaggers out there saying, we got a brand new economy and a brand new government, all set to go, just sign your name here and we'll be off and running. And Catherine Austin Fitts is clearly one of those carpetbaggers.
I called my state senator's office last week. The staffer that answered the phone was knowledgeable, and I said I was concerned about my pension because of what was taking place in Detroit. Mine is the state pension, and would there be any difference? And he said, I will be honest with you, the last meeting that the senator was at, there was a discussion of that. But the people that are in the pension system now won't be touched, but the new ones will be talked into a 401k.
Meanwhile, we've got Washington, D.C. talking about forcing people to liquidate IRAs and 401ks and buy special issued Treasury bonds.
We were discussing, yes.
They absolutely. I would not take anybody's word that pensioners already in the system won't be touched for a simple reason.
Neither will I, Mike. Neither will I. I don't believe anything.
Most of those pensions invested in the mortgage-backed securities back in 2008 because those securities were rated AAA by Wall Street's pet rating agencies. And under U.S. law, pension funds, because the people who are getting the pensions are in a presumed state of dependency, they're too old to start over and rebuild a whole new retirement. And so under law, pension funds can only invest in AAA-rated investments. We now know, of course, that the AAA ratings given to these mortgage-backed securities were part of the gigantic fraud. And pensions that invested in those mortgage-backed securities wound up losing literally billions of dollars. They were defunded. And unfortunately, most people at the state government level are too afraid of Wall Street to stand up and say, look, this is all your fault. You've got to replace that money from in the pension funds that was taken from the mortgage-backed security fraud. And so as a result, it's all shifting. Oh, we've got too many pensioners. They're living too long, really, and it's a blame the victim mindset out there. But the reason pensions are in problem across the country, yes, tax revenues are in decline because wages and salaries are being forced down. High-paying jobs are going to other countries. But the big problem for pensions is that those pensions that invested in those mortgage-backed securities just got absolutely looted when that whole fraud collapsed. And it's the big elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. That's where the money went. Your pension money wound up on Wall Street. Your Social Security money wound up on Wall Street trying to prop it up. And they still can't prop it up. And admittedly, yes, we have people already coming out and saying, okay, we're going to let the collapse clean out all the liabilities and the losses, and we'll just restart that same whole private central bank, fascist economic state, and the American people won't know any better, but we will know much better. All right. Anything else, Janet?
Over the weekend from independent media, and I want to throw this out to you. Talk behind the scenes that the military is talking about a military coup to take out this whole administration, the bankers, and everything, because it's the only way to save America. And we're talking about the top brass of the military.
Well, if that's true, I think we can expect a lot of very depressed top military commanders committing suicide like Burda did, or they'll be asked to resign very quickly, because I know the federal government has viewed that as a potential threat, and they've tried to reshape the top military command as totally obedient. Anybody who might even be thinking that the country is going in the wrong direction has already been replaced. I don't want to see violence in the streets of America. But given that most military people I know are strict constitutionalists, if there were a military coup in the United States of America, at this moment I'm kind of neutral on it as to whether it would be better or worse. It would depend on how the leaders of the coup decided to reshape the country afterwards. But in terms of forcing a change, I'm kind of lukewarm on that whole idea.
Not to force a change, to get rid of the corruption, and the only way you can do it is with the military. I believe that. I'm sorry. I think it's too far gone, and that's what this video was talking about. And I agree with it.
Well, I agree that this government financial system is too far gone. They can't possibly bail themselves out of this mess that they've created. They're violating the Constitution. It is time for this federal government and this financial banking system to go away. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Janet. Back with more calls after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We got some callers waiting on the line. Robert in Missouri, thank you for waiting. Aloha. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Mike. I wanted to piggyback off the last caller. I wanted to call in about an article, and I'll try to segue into that in a second. But the lady that talked about a military coup, and that being our only option. As somebody that was in the military, a military veteran, and I was an enlisted man, I was not an officer. You better be careful what you wish for as far as military coups. You need to study them in other countries and how they go. And it's not a pretty sight. And our Pentagon brass, these guys wearing the stars, most of them are completely compromised. They're completely sold out, and a lot of them are not constitutionalists. Mm-hmm. They don't have a problem drone striking children in Pakistan. They don't have a problem.
Wait a minute. Your serving soldiers on the line are not controlling those drones. Those are being controlled by these guys in these nice air-conditioned buildings in the middle of the United States Great Plains somewhere.
And I was making the guys with the stars, not us corporals and sergeants. The guys with the stars on their collars are the ones that are. I mean, you can't trust these guys any more than you can the Congress.
Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question here. Okay, if the U.S. government is not concerned about a potential military coup, then why are they trying to declare all returning veterans are mentally ill in order to suspend their Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms? I mean, let's just look at how generally paranoid the federal government has become with their need to watch us all and listen to us all and read our emails. This is not a government that feels safe and secure in their power. They're very much afraid right now. And as I told that other caller, I'm not saying a military coup would be a good idea, I said I'm lukewarm on it. And again, most of the military, and I don't know a lot of officers, above the level of major, for example. But your basic rank and file military, they take that oath to the Constitution very, very seriously. And a lot of them are very much opposed to what is going on in the war zone with the drone strikes. And I think out of a sense of loyalty, they don't talk about it an awful lot unless you press them. But when you press them on the issue, they say, yeah, what we're doing is wrong. So like I said, I'm kind of neutral on the idea. I'd like to avoid violence. I still think this entire financial system is going to implode probably right after the G20, when the G20 says to the world, we can't use the dollar anymore. That'll be the final death knell. And but again, as opposed to the federal government declaring war on the 50 states and the American people with all this hollow point ammunition that they've bought, better the federal government fight the military than the federal government fight the American people. Like I said, I'm lukewarm on the idea. Most of the American military people I know are constitutionalists, and they're very much opposed to what has been going on by the federal government. Again, you are correct. The upper ranks are completely compromised. Anybody who had an independent thought in the military high command has already been encouraged to take early retirement, or they've been suicided like Admiral Bordeaux. But that's only going to get you so far. Now, time will solve that mystery. I don't know. It's not up to me whether there's a military coup or not. My attitude would be, if it happens, I don't like the idea because it's violent, but whether it would be an improvement over what we have now or not, I got an open mind at this point. Alrighty, now getting on back to some other stories here. As you probably remember, back when Obama was doing his foreclosure fraud settlement, they made a big deal about how many prosecutions there were for foreclosure fraud. That also turned out to be a lie. They really didn't prosecute anywhere near as many fraudulent mortgage companies and banks as was claimed. The Justice Department originally said 530 people were charged criminally as part of the mortgage fraud working group. It now says the actual number was 107, 80% less than claimed. They were lying to you even back then. This whole foreclosure settlement by Obama was designed to protect and indemnify the mortgage and banking industry for its criminal actions in massive foreclosure fraud. This was official U.S. government policy to allow these banks and mortgage companies to strip American families of their homes because that monthly mortgage payment was not sufficient to keep these banks solvent. They needed the entire value of these homes on their books. It was wealth confiscation, just like Roosevelt did in 1933 by taking the gold. In 2008 to the present, they've been taking your homes. And the foreclosure settlement from the Obama White House basically headed off, halted, stopped dead in its tracks, prosecutions and criminal investigations by the attorneys generals of the 50 states. And the families who did have their homes taken from them illegally through fraud received an average of $300 each as a settlement payment, and some of those checks bounced. This was all about protecting the banking industry by sacrificing the American people. Eric Holder is now out there apologizing for having overinflated the prosecutions of the criminal bankers. He should actually resign. Now, apparently the U.S. Navy has placed an order for 12 more drones for use over Yemen. We are clearly escalating in Yemen. Good reason to keep that embassy closed. The U.S. government still denies that any innocent civilians are being killed in the drone strikes. Anybody who's dead is dead because they were a terror suspect. And yet we know that for every one legitimate, and I use that word loosely, for every one terror suspect, who may be a suspect only because somebody turned over his name in exchange for the cash bounty, 50 innocent bystanders, an average of 50 innocent bystanders are killed with every one of these drone strikes. Ron Paul asks a very important question. Why are we at war with Yemen? What is the rationale? Yemen had weapons of mass destruction. Yemen was supporting Al-Qaeda. Yemen is a threat to the dollar. Yemen has oil. We're at war with a country we don't even have a reason. But when you send drones or any military assets across another nation's border and kill people, you are at war with that country. Now, if you're wondering why Abe Foxman is looking so sad today, it is because that this accused Nazi war criminal, they were getting ready for a big show trial so they could wag Nazis and Hitler at us one more time, age 98, died of natural causes before they could bring him to trial. Remember, after the embarrassment of John Demjanjuk, who was accused of war crimes, convicted, sentenced to death, waiting to be executed when evidence surfaced that he was not the guy he was accused of. But Israel can't stand the idea of any one of their Nazi prosecutions being proven to be false, so they came back and accused him of other things. We have to prove he's guilty of something, or the credibility of Israel when it screams Nazi is in doubt. So they had this other guy, 98 years old. They were getting ready to put him on a show trial and say, remember, Nazis, and it was 98 years old. It's a reminder that all of that stuff that supposedly happened in World War II happened before we were all born, and they're still trying to milk it for political gain. And this guy fooled them, died of pneumonia before they could get him to trial. And so Israel and the ADL are screaming, what do we do now? We have to wag Nazis and Hitler at people before we invade Lebanon, Syria, Gaza, Sinai. It's going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show today, and we're going to take a phone call. Aaron in Texas. Aloha, Aaron. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I got two questions on the economy, and I'm going to ask them and go ahead and let you go so we can get back to work.
Okay.
My first question is, can we still save our economy? My second question is, what methods did the Nazis use to make their economy as good as they got? I'm going to go ahead and let you go.
Okay, would you repeat that question again, because you cut out briefly and I missed the middle part of what you said.
The first question was, can our economy still be saved? And my second question was, what method did the Nazis use to make their economy stronger? Because I know that back in the 2018, their economy was really bad.
Okay.
And, yeah, those are my questions.
The answer to your the answer to your first question is no. At this point, the U.S. economy cannot be saved. It has basically, out of a sheer sense of personal greed and worshiping on the altar of Adam Smith, boxed itself into a hideous corner where it's all being propped up through fraud. The world is getting ready to turn away from the U.S. dollar despite the threat of U.S. military intervention. There's no real value behind the U.S. dollar. It is just accumulating debt. And part of the problem, of course, is that private central bank that was allowed to issue the public currency as a loan at interest, that by design piles up debt faster than the available money supply with which to pay that debt. That's part of the problem. Losing our manufacturing was another big part of it. Allowing rampant runaway agricultural technology to wreck our export market was another. There's a lot of overlapping factors. We know the U.S. government likes to claim that their total indebtedness is hovering at somewhat above $16 trillion, just below Congress's mandated debt ceiling. We also know the U.S. Treasury has been holding that debt number for more than 2 months, meaning it's another complete fraud. We had an article come out last week saying that the actual indebtedness of the U.S. government is now $74 trillion when you take the off-budget financial obligations this government owes. And there was an article literally 2 years ago in National Public Radio saying that the actual indebtedness of the federal government is over $200 trillion. There simply are not enough Americans to make good on all of that debt. And of course, it's always accumulating more and more interest. So it's not like we could say we'll pay off that $200 trillion so much every year until it's paid off, because even today, all the U.S. government does is pay part of the interest. They can't pay the entire interest to hold the debt under control. They certainly have not made a payment on the principal for decades. Since Vietnam, The American taxpayer has paid into the banking system more in interest payments than the actual principal on the U.S. debt at Vietnam. And the financial centers support those members of Congress who keep this scam going so that you're permanently slave to the interest payments and they don't dare touch the principal because that is their power over the government and the people. This system cannot be fixed unless and until we get a leader with the moral courage of an Andrew Jackson or an Abraham Lincoln or a John F. Kennedy, all of whom challenged the bankers' control of the nation's economy and all of whom were immediately subject to assassination attempts with 2 successes out of 3. Now, as far as the second part of your question, going back to that, I have to be honest, I actually forgot what that second question was. Manny, do you remember what he said?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, Manny forgot it too. So, all right. And I apologize for getting off on that point. But no, this economy can't be saved. The whole system needs a reset. We need another Andrew Jackson. Shut down that private central bank. Oh, I remember the question. What did Germany do in the 1930s? Well, basically the same thing the United States did in 1779. They broke free of being forced to be dependent on a private bank that loaned banknotes at interest into circulation. In the case of the American Revolution, it was the Bank of England. In the case of Germany, it was the private central bank imposed on them by the Treaty of Versailles at the end of World War I. Germany simply created its own currency inside the government, spent it into circulation to buy what the government wanted. It flowed through circulation without accruing interest to the private central bank, and then was taxed back in the same amount at the end of the cycle to balance the books. And it is a wonderful system for the people of a nation. It made Germany prosperous, so much so it was called the German miracle. It made the early United States prosperous, which is why the private central bankers can't stand it. And if you go back and you read the rhetoric that was being dished out against Abraham Lincoln by the European banking cartels about what a terrible disaster it would be for a government to furnish its own money without debt and be free from debt, and it could not be tolerated. That's why the Rothschild banking cartel, when Congress refused to renew the charter of the first bank of the United States, They set up and triggered the War of 1812, which even though the United States won it, it forced them into such poverty they had to charter the second Bank of the United States. And Andrew Jackson shut down that second Bank of the United States because he saw very clearly these private banks, given control of a nation's economy, operate that economy for their own profitability and not what is best for the nation and its people. And he shut it down. It was the hallmark of his second term in office, Jackson and no bank. There was an immediate assassination attempt, which failed, and the assassin basically said, if I kill Jackson, there'll be more money. Abraham Lincoln, rather than enslave the Union taxpayers to the bankers for 30% interest, which is what they wanted to charge to finance the Civil War, Lincoln invoked his authority as President of the United States and issued his own government currency, the greenback, which triggered that huge backlash from the banking cartels of Europe. Most European nations supported the Confederacy because they wanted to crush out this idea of a government-issued currency. They actually considered invading the United States on the side of the Confederacy, but were held in check by Russia, which had just gone through their revolution, kicked out private banking, and were looking at the model of banking created by the United States following the revolution. Government issuance and control of the currency. What a radical revolutionary idea that was. That's something that is not taught in our public schools, that Russia actually came to Lincoln's aid during the Civil War. And then, of course, John F. Kennedy had his Executive Order 11110, which issued $4.5 billion of United States notes into circulation without accruing interest to a private bank. 5 months after he signed that executive order, John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dealey Plaza, Dallas, Texas. We're coming up on the 50th anniversary of that. and the United States notes were pulled from circulation and destroyed, delivering the American people bound hand and foot back to the slavery of the Federal Reserve System. And on the Warren Commission investigating the assassination sat John J. McCloy, president of the Chase Manhattan Bank, president of the World Bank, and I don't care how good a banker he is not qualified to be investigating the murder of a president. Hence, he was there to make sure the banker connection to the assassination never saw the light of day. Oh, it was a crazed lone nut assassin. Was this guy in the bookstore? Really? Pay no attention to all those extra gunshots all around Dealey Plaza. That's all you need to think. All righty. Let's see. We're going to grab another phone call here. Tony in Indiana. Aloha, Tony. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I got George in Texas.
Oh, I'm sorry, George in Texas. I'm not paying attention to my little text screen. George in Texas, aloha, what's on your mind?
You know, the thing is about those phony terror threats in Texas, I'm not going to name names or anything like that, but it's more like what they were saying was like contrary to what they were saying, because I'm sitting there observing the video, and I noticed downtown Austin looks almost like a ghost town, and talking to people who live in Austin, it was a ghost town. Nobody was in downtown Austin. For the reason is, I don't think they're afraid of Muslim terrorists. I just think they're afraid of security theater more than them Muslims.
Well, you know, there was an ongoing terror drill taking place in Austin, and probably most people figured, I'm just going to stay at home because of this very strange tendency for these terror drills to actually turn into real terror events. But the Department of Homeland Security is already backing off that and saying that the terror alert in Austin was issued by accident. It was an internal memo that nobody was taking seriously, and it wasn't supposed to get out. So they're already backpedaling from this thing. I think the U.S. government's finally beginning to realize terror theater isn't working much anymore, which means the next time they try a false flag, they're going to make it so big that nobody will dare take the chance it wasn't absolutely true.
I have one more thing to say.
All right, we're going to bring you back. We'll bring you back after the commercial break, after these 4 minutes, so stay on the line, George. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're still on the phone with George from Texas. And, George, you said you had another question.
I won 2 tickets to the Houston Texans home opener, and I'm going to wind up selling them because I am not going to go to a football game and get groped, and I have to have this clear plastic bag to see what my contents are. And I really went to Reliance Stadium. I seen some adults who have undergarments because incontinence pads, and I don't really think that's none of the league's business. What's in your personal tote bag?
Well, I absolutely agree, and we know that TSA has severely harmed tourism out here in Hawaii, and we know lots of people who used to work in tourism-related businesses. They're now out of business. They're unemployed. They can't find any new jobs. And now, of course, the TSA, having strangled tourism across America, now they want to start strangling sporting events. And then they're talking about having these kind of TSA crotch groping going on at shopping malls at a time when our retail is already struggling just as hard as they can. It doesn't make any sense. It's just the security industrial complex running rampant across our society, the same way the military industrial complex has done so, the same way the health industrial complex is continuing to do. It's just all driven by vast sums of money seeking more sums of money, and there's no control over this behavior because the government is just saying, hey, anything that generates a taxable revenue is a blessing right now. George, are you there? I guess not. All right, we're going to switch over.
Hello?
You're still there?
Yeah, I'm just saying. I think when they finish, ruining the tourism, the sporting events, the shopping malls, the movie theaters, they're going to be coming to our front doors, wanting to come in our houses and get into our personal space. And I really think that's when it's going to really get ugly.
Well, TSA isn't doing that, but we're already seeing where police departments across the country, especially in apartment complexes where you're not considered a homeowner, they're just conducting random, what they're calling public safety searches. They'll knock on your door and say, we want to come in and take a look around. It's a public safety search. We don't need a warrant. And they go on in and they're looking for drugs and they're seizing guns. And it is completely out of control, and all of it is unconstitutional. I'm thinking about coming out with a new bumper sticker for our online store. Constitution, use it or lose it, because there's nobody enforcing the Constitution and the Bill of Rights right now except we the people.
Well, the thing is about those apartment complexes. If I were the tenants and the police are coming in, I'd be suing not only the police but the landlord because because even if you on a lease, you temporarily have private property rights. You rent that space. I mean, you have that right perception of privacy.
Well, something you need to remember, that Fourth Amendment does not make a distinction between homeowners, landowners, and tenants. It says the right of the people to be secure in their privacy. That means everybody. And the government is just looking for more excuses to turn the police force into a tool of repression, to keep us all scared of the police. That, I think, is a big reason for all this sudden surge in police brutality we're seeing across the country. They want Americans to be afraid of a police uniform as part of that psychological pressure to keep us terrorized.
Well, personally, I just think the police are dumb enough to go. If the police are dumb enough to go along with it, I think there's going to be consequences. Not soon down the road.
Well, there are no consequences. I mean, when you decide you're going to use the police force as a tool of political repression, the first message you send out is there is nothing the police can do that will get them into trouble. In fact, that lady cop down in Texas who was caught on video groping the private parts of these other two women, she's been hired back. She was fired during the huge public outcry. She still has other outstanding lawsuits against her for this kind of brutality, and the police department just hired her back, put her right back to work.
Well, I just, I'll have a good day, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Joseph in New York. Aloha, Joseph. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
Beautiful show. You've been talking about Vincent Foster.
Yes.
All right, I found a website called Charleston, like the city of Charleston, Voice. And they have quite a list of the Clinton body count.
Yes.
I don't know if you've seen it. I just want to bring your attention to it. You might want to check it out, and it is quite extensive.
Well, I think at this point we've come to understand that presidents do have dead body counts. It's just in the case of the Clintons, they were a little more well-known and visible, and certainly Vince Foster was one of them. The original list of the Clinton body count actually began at my website a long time ago, and I'll go ahead and relink that for people to wax nostalgic over. But yeah, it's a very serious situation, and it's one of the reasons why we should be very, very alarmed about Hillary aiming for the White House in 2016. There's also a documentary you need to look at called The Clinton Chronicles. We've linked it to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. You need to look at because it is absolutely inconceivable that Hillary Clinton, who was basically handling her husband Bill when he was governor and then later president, did not know about all this other activity going on. If it was all happening around here and she had no clue, then she's not qualified to be an administrator, let alone the president. But it's just shocking the degree of criminality we're seeing in the top levels of the federal government right now. It's all tied in with drug running, money laundering, CIA, arms smuggling, all of it.
You're right. Okay, Michael. Evidently, you already knew. So, anywho, thank you very much.
Yes, I already knew because it was the Vincent Foster case that accidentally launched my career as a blogger, peace activist, talk show host almost 20 years ago. The first part of next year will actually be 20 years. And I didn't set out to do this intentionally. I wasn't in the middle of doing visual effects in the movies, and all of a sudden I say, I'm just going to quit doing this for a while and go out and be an annoyance to corrupt government. It was just entirely an accident. I had a little animation set up in my home in North Hollywood, like I have here on the island of Oahu, and I was doing a little private work, and I was also working at a company downtown that shared the same building with CNN's Hollywood branch, Hollywood division. And I was just working in my office one day, and all of a sudden ABC News ran that photo, leaked by the White House to Reuters, showing the hand of Vincent Foster next to the gun he supposedly killed himself with. Now, you need to understand the context of the situation. My business is at that time was film fakery, and knowing what made a picture look real or not is an essential part of that. And the instant I looked at that picture, I said, this is a staged shot. There are so many things wrong with this photo. And so I hit the frame cap key, and I printed out a color hard copy of that photo with the hand and the gun, and just took it into work the next day with me. And during lunch, we had this little outdoor cafe that was shared by all the building's tenants. And I was just showing this picture to my coworkers and saying, this thing's a complete fraud. And I remember very clearly there were some people from CNN at the next table listening intently to what I was saying. And that night, the threatening, harassing phone calls began. My job at that company in the building evaporated. I couldn't get hired anymore. There was this huge blacklisting going on, all kinds of lies about me to destroy my career, and they succeeded. I got driven out of Hollywood, and we had to leave Southern California eventually. And all of a sudden, because I had suddenly so much time on my hands, I decided I was going to dig a little bit further. And the further I dug into what was going on inside the government, as not reported by the television networks, the more I found, which led to the original version of my website. It wasn't always called WhatReallyHappened.com. It began as a sub-page on my animation business site. Then it moved to its own identity as Rancho Runamucka, because I was still kind of taking this stuff, tongue-in-cheek. And then eventually it became WhatReallyHappened.com. And now we got a huge readership and, people around the globe. And I didn't intend to follow this career path. I certainly didn't intend to drag my lovely and very tolerant and supportive wife along this very rough trail that we have been on for the last 20 years. And my point of view here is I didn't start this altercation between me and the government. They started it. I plan on finishing it. We'll be back after the news break and commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 3. And I want to take a little time to talk about the pod people, because we are just one day short of a month away from the anniversary of the 9/11 false flag attacks at the World Trade Towers. And inevitably, as we see this time of year, the government-controlled assets are out there on the blogosphere, once again trying to push this nonsense about how there was no plane that crashed into the Pentagon. It was a missile. It was a directed energy weapon. It was mutant gerbils, whatever they're saying. And this is a classic propaganda technique called poisoning the well. When you have a large segment of the population who does not trust the official story about anything, it is a age-old propaganda trick to infiltrate some complete, total nonsense in there in order to give the corporate media an easy handle with which to ridicule the entire subject. The Kennedy assassination, the poison the well tactic they used when the House Select Committee on Assassinations re-examined some of these assassinations that had taken place, they made a big deal about the fact that there was an open umbrella on the street next to Kennedy's motorcade and how it had a poisoned dart gun that paralyzed Kennedy and set him up for the assassination. And they brought in the umbrella. They located the person, and it turned out to just be an umbrella. And the people on the House Select Committee are saying, "Don't point that thing at me." Oh, how silly those conspiracy people are who don't believe the Warren Report. In the end, because of the acoustic data, the House Select Committee was forced to conclude that, yes, there had been multiple sources of gunfire in Dealey Plaza and therefore a conspiracy. But that's what poisoning the well is all about. When Jim Garrison brought later admitted CIA asset to trial for the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the poison the well tactic they played on him was they provided a witness who looked absolute golden, linking Clay Shaw with Lee Harvey Oswald. And then when the guy got on the stand, he blurted out that every night he fingerprinted his own daughter when she came home to make sure nobody had planted a substitution on him. Just absolutely destroyed Garrison's credibility with the jury. That's how they got Clay Shaw off. It's not shown in Oliver Stone's JFK movie, but that's how they did it. And then Clay Shaw died under mysterious circumstances a couple of months later. In the 1970s, Richard Secord acknowledged Clay Shaw had, in fact, been a CIA agent. And photos surfaced of Clay Shaw, Lee Harvey Oswald, and some of the other associates there having wild parties at Clay Shaw's home. So Garrison was right, and they undermined him with poison the well. And that's what they're trying to do with the no plane at the Pentagon theory. And I think the game was they were going to try and trick all the conspiracy websites into going along with this no plane at the Pentagon nonsense. Then they would release one of the confiscated videos, clearly, unequivocally showing a 757 crashing into the Pentagon in order to discredit the entire 9/11 Truth movement. Fortunately, most of the 9/11 Truth movement realized it was a trick and they didn't fall for it. And that's why that whole situation fizzled. But, it's an easy handle for the corporate media. Anytime the corporate media is out there ridiculing the 9/11 Truth movement, the first thing they go to is these people don't even believe a 757 rammed the Pentagon. It's an easy, convenient handle because they don't want to talk about how it is that the BBC announced the collapse of World Trade Center 7 26 minutes before it actually happened. They don't want to talk about the way World Trade Center building number 7 collapsed into its own footprint, despite the fact it wasn't hit by an aircraft and wasn't all that involved with the fire, or how it is that President Bush's Secret Service detail knew he was not a target and did not have to be removed from that school in Florida where he was reading about pet goats until it was time for him to make his speech. The corporate media can't answer those questions. So they come up with the no plane thing, and that's what they put all their focus on to try and discredit the 9/11 Truth movement. Of course, anybody who's still pushing that no plane nonsense, there's a question they can't answer. Why? Why would somebody do a substitution, risking detection? They have to get rid of that 757 and its passengers anyway. Why not take the simple route and go ahead and crash it into that Pentagon? Hundreds and hundreds of people saw that 757 flying towards the Pentagon. If there was some kind of a dodge or a swap, you would expect hundreds and hundreds of eyewitnesses would have seen it flying away. And because of the loud bang, more people would be looking. It's a fraud, and I figured I'd sort of preemptively go after that and say, it is. It's part of the usual government propaganda tricks that they like to put out there, like to keep the confusion up there, put out nonsensical stuff about HARP and chemtrails and all this other stuff to try and portray the independent media as a bunch of kooks and wackos that no real patriotic American would ever want to listen to, except that now the majority of Americans are listening to us for their political news. Oh boy, the phone lines just lit up here. Let's see, Doug in California. Aloha, Doug. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Love your show, man. Hey, what I want to go back to is the first hour, and you talked about the GMO and the ovary situation with the women.
Actually, the link was between ovaries and the Gardasil vaccine.
Yes. And the thing of it is, I have a 23-year-old daughter, and I'm scared to death as far as, her eating GMO. So I sent her out. After I listened to your first hour, I sat there and I sent her an email and I said, hey, listen, you got to look for GMO or non-GMO now.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
How do we get that in the United Nations? I mean, in the United States, how do we get that packaged on each package that it's non-GMO? I mean, I know it's like Kraft and General Mills.
Here's what you do. Here's what you do. Here's what you do. Here's what you all do. You go to your supermarket and you talk to the manager and say, I want food on the shelves that is free from GMO, and if there's GMO in it, I want it labeled. I will not buy an unlabeled product that might contain GMO. I'm going to err on the side of caution. It's just going to take a mass demand by the consumers to have safe, healthy food in the supermarkets. And if enough people complain, the supermarket chains, they're not necessarily loyal to these big food corporations. It's just convenient to them to go to Kraft or these other companies to get, a good stock at a good price. But if it just sits there on the shelf and nobody's buying it, they will get the message. Now, as I mentioned before, there is a USDA certified organic logo, a little ring with a bar through the middle. And as of right now, to be certified at 100% organic means no GMO. Another thing you might want to look for are those kosher labels on food. Kosher certification. A lot of people complain we're paying extra so that label can be on there, but there's actually an upside because to be certified kosher also means no GMO. And so you might want to hit that kosher section. Okay, doesn't mean there isn't other bad stuff in there. I got some kosher hot dogs the other day. We're loaded with MSG, and I had huge headaches, so I can't have those anymore. But that's two ways that you can go. When the supermarket chains see the consumers staying away from GMO and actively pursuing non-GMO, they're going to get the message, and they're going to change providers.
because we're scared to death of GMO. I mean, we really are. I mean, after they just burned all the crops over in Europe and Russia and everything else, people ought to be really scared. But of course, the media is not covering it. So.
Well, the corporate media isn't. The corporate media is dependent on those huge advertising contracts from companies like Monsanto and big agriculture, and they're going to toe the line. We saw them do that out in California during the campaign for Prop 37, where the corporate media in lockstep was opposed to Prop 37 because that's what their advertisers told them to do. But fortunately here at Republic Broadcasting, we don't have any big advertisers that have that kind of clout to tell us what stories to tell you, what stories not to tell you. Our advertisers are very cool. They sell their products. They don't tell us what to write or broadcast, and we don't tell them what to sell. But what's going to change the attitude of the supermarkets is consumer pressure from customers going in and just saying, I don't want GMO, I want labeling, or I'm not going to buy it at all. That's what will change it.
Yeah, we got to do it.
Yes, we do. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with more phone calls after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones. Got a lot of callers waiting. Kathleen in Texas. Aloha, Kathleen. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. The gentleman that called concerned about his daughter and the Gardasil. I heard a 3-hour interview with Deborah Travarsi on RBN, and her website, may I give the website?
Yes.
StopTheCrime.net, and she went into great, horrifying detail about the not only the vaccines, but what's in the food. And one thing that she said that I had never heard before was that many products, including Mountain Dew, my daughter-in-law drinks, has aborted fetal tissue in it.
That one I'm not so sure about. I think that came from the fact that they were deriving chemicals to basically get that master pattern for a bulk manufactured flavoring, and I know it sounds really icky, and frankly I think it's very icky as well, but they're not actually taking fetal cells and putting them in each individual bottle. What they use the fetal cells for is to find chemicals, because current chemical manufacturing and synthesis is still not well evolved, and there are chemicals you can only find in nature. That's why you still have all these people crawling all over the Amazonian rainforest looking for new pharmaceuticals. They're looking for those chemicals that can't yet be synthesized in a lab. But once you have that master chemical, then you can, through various forms of genetic engineering, start producing it in bulk. The real concern for GMO, though, we understand that during manufacturing, sufficient temperatures will destroy the actual modified DNA, but that doesn't end the problem. The problem is, in the organism as it is growing up before harvesting, that altered DNA is producing proteins that are slightly different than what occur in nature. And so this protein expression, producing proteins that aren't exactly like found in nature, is what can trigger severe allergic reactions and other toxic effects. And it's considered a secondary part of the GMO process, and hence there's not a lot of paying attention to it. But we've seen some very unexpected side effects. GMO corn, turns out the stalk of the corn is much tougher than the natural variety. Farmers are literally having to buy Kevlar tires for their tractors to avoid them from being punctured. And it underscores the fact that when you tinker with the gene in one location to get a desired result, you affect the organism as a whole, because the gene is very self-referential. It's always crisscrossing back and forth. So when you tinker one part of the gene, it will trigger unexpected changes in other parts of the organism that people aren't even looking for and don't actually surface until it provokes a harmful response.
Also, the corn, I've heard several times that it also sterilizes men, so eating the corn. But
that's the epicite gene. That's a separate, distinct thing, and it's called the epicite gene. And this was a USDA-funded research development program in Southern California that produced a corn that, when you eat it, it will produce antibodies to sperm. And anybody who's eating it, male or female, will be unable to reproduce at that point. One wonders why they were trying to create this particular corn, and now that we know that Monsanto's GMO wheat went wild, broke free from their test plots, and contaminated wheat all the way out to Oregon, there's a very real possibility this epicite gene has broken into the wild and is infecting corn all over the world. I mean, it's an incredibly reckless way to be treating this technology.
Well, the reason I called was that way back when you were talking about Hillary, may I mention that?
Yes.
I was very disappointed that you didn't hear Werner's reference, because that story not only has Hillary and Bill and Vince Foster and even the dog that you talk about at the end of your little soliloquy about what you're going to do to bankers. The story is just so perfect that I just hope that you, may I give you the quote so you could read it?
Well, I'll tell you what, if you will email them to me, I'll put it in the reader's letters.
I don't have computers. I listen to you by phone, and I don't have any.
Okay, well, I would just as soon not, because I agree there's a lot of interesting metaphor in the Bible which tells us these kind of corruptions in high places are a permanent curse on humanity. But I would rather stay with what is known fact here in the 20th and 21st centuries. In fact, we just put up a very interesting story from Barnhart.biz talking about how Hillary made that $100,000 in cattle futures, and it involves classic money laundering and straddling the trades, this trader Red Bone. And here's a part I didn't know before. Red Bone cleared Hillary's cattle trades through a company called Refco. Refco today is known by a different name, MF Global. And so it just all ties together in that situation. Kathleen, we're going to let you go and switch over to Scott in Wisconsin. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Scott, are you there?
Mike, how you doing there, bud, today?
I'm doing really good. What's going on?
Hey, Mike, I wanted to share something that you were mentioning something, and you put this date down when you and I talk about this. You were talking about 9/11, and we're a month away from that.
Yes.
I want to pose a question here in the middle of this, but you know, you were talking last week about a stage attack or whatever, but I follow the side of the scripture and then with this corrupt world. And my question, Mike, to you is: if we, why is and we all know why is the Homeland Security purchased all those rounds of hollow point bullets? They are preparing. That's your answer. What's going to happen? They are preparing for an altercation with the American people.
That's absolutely true, because the
collapse that's coming, and I believe with studying the ferry market, Mike, of 2008. Go back and look at the ferry market, the pattern that they brought it up to. It's the same way when you grow a tree. It can only grow to a certain height, and then it maintains. The same way with this way of Best Buy going out this year, and all these other things that have been lagging behind, just building up. You got to question yourself around 9/11. Is that when they're going to push the collapse and start martial law?
Well, I don't know that.
I just wanted to point that at you, and if you could speak about that.
Well, I'm going to do that right now here. First of all, I don't think anybody's really intending to collapse the U.S. economy. The problem is they can't stop it from happening. They can't stop it. It is now inevitable. They have borrowed themselves into an unpayable black hole of debt. They've been scraping wealth from the American people, trying to keep this system going, and there's no more wealth out here to be taken from the American people. They're taking all the homes, taking everything, trying to convince us to go further into debt, because that debt is considered an item of value in this economic system, and people don't want to borrow. I get credit card applications in the mail all the time. I just throw them in the shredder. I don't want to borrow any more money. I want the freedom and the opportunity to earn more money so I can pay my debts. That's what I want. I think that's pretty much what all of America wants. We don't want more handouts. We don't want more loans. We want the jobs back that made the American people have a good standard of living, that made the nation great. They have all been thrown away through a reckless disregard for the welfare of the nation as a whole in order to serve the corporate greed of this giant open-air casino called Wall Street that just wants to get rich by shoving the paper notes back and forth as quickly as possible and hope that they'll magically increase. And that's what's going on there. All righty. I think the obvious reason for the Department of Homeland Security arming itself up is to declare war on the American people. And the exact reason for that I will talk about when we come back from these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And following up on the discussion before the commercial break, the reason the Department of Homeland Security has been buying all this guns and ammunition is to be prepared for war against the American people and against the 50 states. The U.S. government would love some kind of a violent uprising or rioting that they could use to declare a national emergency, shred what is left of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, declare martial law, and basically get this fascist dictatorship really ramped up and running as planned. They would prefer that because shooting people is what this government knows how to do to solve its problems. Look how they're dealing with all the diplomatic problems around the world. They're not doing what we tell them to do, bomb them. Iraq wants to sell their oil for euros, bomb them. Libya wants a gold dinar, bomb them. Killing is the only solution this government seems to have for any of their problems. And right now they understand they have lost the trust of the American people. The majority of American people see this federal government as completely illegitimate and unconstitutional. And they're wondering what to do about it. Now, the one thing this government cannot handle is 330 million Americans standing up peacefully and shouting, "We will no longer be the wallets of last resort for Wall Street's bad decision-making." Because remember, the deal that the U.S. government offers to foreign investors is that you can park your money in the United States of America, and if you make money, you get to keep it. And if you lose money, the American taxpayers will be forced to cover the losses. That's the deal. That's the only thing keeping foreign investment in this country. And it was demonstrated during the S&L bailouts of the 1980s when we were all told that, our tax money was going to save all these pensioners and widows and orphans who were living off their savings and loan bank accounts, and we had to make good for them. But the reality is the vast majority of the accounts that were settled by the Resolution Trust Corporation at your expense were numbered, brokered corporate investment accounts. And of course, following 2008, we've seen that again with all these bailouts where the American people are looted to cover the losses from Wall Street's crimes, corruptions, recklessness, and outright stupidity. That is fascism. The wealthy get to keep the money they make. The losses are transferred to the people. And the American people are tired of it. And they're standing up and telling the rest of the world, we will not be the wallets of last resort for Wall Street's crimes. And it's working. Foreign investment in the United States has been in decline. And now with Russia actively telling their part of the world, you should be getting out of the Western banks and the Western economies as fast as you can, because it's all going to come crashing down. The situation will accelerate. And when the crash comes, we, the American people, are going to point the finger of blame where it richly deserves to go. Wall Street and Washington, D.C., that enabled them, that abandoned its role as arbiter of the needs of the people versus the desires of the money junkies. And that means the U.S. government will go away. And in order to forestall that, there is a school of thought that if they can get a violent revolution going among the people, then they can declare martial law and stay in power and just get rid of that pesky Constitution thing, like they were floating the trial balloons in the New York Times and MSNBC a few months back about how much more efficient the federal government would be without that pesky Bill of Rights in the way. The American people didn't go for that. I think this Adam Kokesh armed march into Washington, D.C. last July 4th was intended to create the illusion of an armed revolt that could be used to declare martial law and a national emergency and a gun grab. But it fizzled because we recognized it was a trap that we were being led into. Then they tried to create race riots across the nation following the George Zimmerman acquittal. Remember, the whole week before the verdict came in, the corporate media was always, if he's acquitted, there'll be race riots. If he's acquitted, there'll be race riots. Then it came out the Department of Justice was actually funding all the protests against Zimmerman, trying to create a racial crisis that would lead to a repeat of the Los Angeles riots on a national scale. And we didn't fall for that one either. But that's the plan. Right now, the federal government would welcome any kind of an armed uprising because that they know how to deal with. And that's why they bought all that hollow point ammunition, which is human-killing ammunition. It is not target-shooting ammunition. It is designed to inflict maximum damage on the target and kill people. And they've been buying billions and billions of rounds. They're buying guns all over the place. The IRS was caught out training with AR-15s because they're getting upset. Too many Americans have come to understand that 16th Amendment was never actually ratified. And if you're going to stand on the constitutional process of ratification, well, our solution is we're going to bomb you. We're going to shoot you. Because that's what the government knows how to do. And I'll let you in on a little secret. I wouldn't worry too much about it. We've all seen how government workers are unenthusiastic about the jobs they're paid to do, even though they're more highly paid for those jobs than people doing the same work in the private sector. Do you really think those federal workers over at places like the National Weather Service are going to risk their lives manning the barricades to protect their bosses from an enraged American people? I don't think so. They're going to run like heck. And then when it's all over, we will pick up all those very expensive military-style weapons and we'll sell them all surplus under the slogan, never fired, only dropped once. All righty, we got some more callers on the line. Fred in Michigan. Aloha, Fred. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Tell you are an encyclopedia of knowledge here, Mike.
Thank you.
What continues to haunt me whenever 9/11 comes up is the fact that Ehud Olmert ordered Giuliani to release the Israeli operatives who were dressed in Arab clothing, dancing Israelis, who were censored and filmed the event. And then the 200-plus operatives that were arrested by FBI, Chertoff, who's a dual Israeli-American citizen, ordered those all to be released. They all went back to Israel. So, here we got all the police, the New Jersey State Police, the guy Scott DiCarlo and his colleagues doing a stellar job in arresting these operatives, and then they're forced to release them. And
oh yeah, they wanted those guys out of the country as fast as possible. And by the way, the dancing Israelis is actually a separate group from the Israelis who were running around dressed like Arab sheiks, which, by the way, Arab Muslims don't actually dress like that. It was pure costuming so that people would say, oh, there's Arabs over by the tunnel, they're going to blow it up. I mean, the whole thing was a sell. And you're absolutely right. Don't forget, in the weeks leading up to 9/11, the FBI had stumbled across the largest foreign spy operation ever mounted against America by a foreign power, being run by Israel. They were tapped into police communications. Israeli drug dealers were getting tip-offs when the raids were going to occur, all kinds of stuff like that. And when 9/11 happened, Carl Cameron did a 4-part series on Israeli spying on Fox News in which a U.S. government official confirmed there was evidence linking those arrested Mossad agents with 9/11, but that evidence was classified by the United States government. And then they very quietly sent these guys home where they were treated like celebrities. They were on TV saying comments like, we were there to document the event. And the videotape those dancing Israelis shot is still classified to this very day. The inside information is it captures the first plane impact, which proves they knew it was going to happen before it did. They got into position with the camera to, quote, document the event, end quote. And that video is still classified to this very day.
Like, there's guys, you mentioned Wall Street. There's a fella, name. There's a tax Wall Street party that's developed in New York City. Some guy, Webster Tarpley. That's where I heard it. Webster Tarpley. It was interviewed. Tax. Why can't we tax all these Wall Street transactions that are done electronically, however many.
Oh, that would certainly put the brakes on all this high-frequency computer trading that they're using to rig the market, which is why it'll never happen. Wall Street will call up their pet Congress critters and say, you will oppose this transaction tax. I mean, Wall Street's history for the entire history of the United States has been transferring their tax burden onto the people. When the first income tax was passed, it was 1% on ordinary citizens. I don't think any of us would complain about a 1% income tax. And above a certain level of wealth, the rate jumped up to something like 16%. And now, of course, we have a situation where ordinary working Americans are dealing with an aggregate tax rate of 50%, and Wall Street corporations get by paying no taxes at all. It's completely topsy-turvy system. Got to take a break for some commercials. Fred, I'm going to let you go. We've got 2 more calls waiting when we come back from these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go back to the phones here. We've got Denise in New Jersey. Aloha, Denise. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I've been listening to you for a couple of years now, but this is my first time calling.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you a question in regards to NSA and the consciousness grid and also the position of our military bases. I would also like to know how come you disapprove of people talking about advanced technology being used, and yet you admit that the military is about 20 to 50 years ahead in the weapons development. What or who is to say that they don't use that now?
Well, the question is, I'm not sure what technologies you're reporting on, but the question is whether the technologies actually make sense, because there's a lot of nonsense speculation out there, and because I come from a scientific background, I can look at it and say, yeah, this is entirely possible. Is it practical? Maybe. Is it reasonable? Probably not. And it always gets back to a question of, okay, let's say that the government is capable of doing X, Y, Z. Why would they bother? And so forth. And just a little careful analysis really does illustrate why certain topics on technology are welcome here at What Really Happened, and some simply are not. We know that the government itself puts out a lot of nonsensical stuff in order to conceal the real purpose behind certain installations. And I'll give you a good example would be HAARP, which was a test platform for medium wave synthetic aperture radar. The idea was to bounce a radar beam off the ionosphere and be able to see something that was over the horizon. Of course, that's now made obsolete by space-based imaging radar. But all the story about weather modification and everything was put out there so that people looking at this facility would say, oh, it's weather modification, and they wouldn't look at the antenna array with an analytical eye and figure out what it was really all about. We know that a lot of this nonsense about alien UFOs flying around the Nevada desert was there to basically cover up the development of Black Project aircraft, so that people who would see a couple of $1 trillion of tax money flash overhead would run around saying, I saw an alien spaceship, and be ignored, as opposed to somebody said, hey, I just saw this really amazing high-performance aircraft, which would attract all the foreign spies to go on out there and pitch tents near Area 51.
Okay. Now, what or who determines the global positioning of all of our military bases, and how come we share some of those bases with countries that we don't even have with, like Antarctica?
Well, the positioning of military bases is a complex issue. It has to do, first of all, with where America sees its strategic necessity at the time, whether or not the host country is willing to have a military base there. The sharing of bases is to share the costs and try and forge some kind of strategic partnership with those foreign military institutions. But it's basically, where do we need a base right now? And it's not entirely different from when Rome had to figure out where to best position their legions within the empire in order to put them within easy reach of any provinces that dared rebel.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mike. Have a good day.
All right. Thank you very much. Last phone call of the day, Kyle in Philadelphia. Aloha, Kyle. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. First of all, let me just say I follow a very strict rule of 80-20, meaning if I agree with somebody 80% of the time and disagree with them 20% of the time, then still okay in my book. And I'd say with you, I agree with you about 90% of the time and disagree 10% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that it's really nitpicking at this point, and I shouldn't even focus on it, but when I hear you say that there was a plane at the Pentagon, I do feel like I need to take issue with that.
All right, let me ask you one question. Let me ask you just one question, okay? Why, when they have to get rid of that 757 and the passengers anyway, do they not just go ahead and crash that plane into the Pentagon? Why risk having somebody with a camera catch the deception? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Is it possible they could do it? Yes. Why would they? There isn't a motive for that kind of a deception, but there is a motive for them to plant that out there in the independent media so the corporate media can make fun of it.
Well, the motive would be out of necessity, because as we know, the Pentagon, the White House, the Capitol is the most heavily defended place in the country, and there's a good chance that, if it's a very widespread operation, there's a chance that it could not have happened. It might have gotten shot down, might not have gotten through.
No, not with the White House in control of the air defenses. Remember, just months before 9/11, authority to intercept hijacked aircrafts was removed from the commanders of the Air Force bases, and the rule was changed so that only Donald Rumsfeld could authorize fighters to intercept a hijacked plane. So all of America's air defenses were on the ground, or they were way off over North Dakota at an exercise to clear the way for this thing. And so that's there is no necessity there at all when the same people behind 9/11 are in control of the nation's air defenses. Remember that story about the couple of fighters that they did have close to New York, how they were flown out hundreds of miles over the Atlantic before they were allowed to turn back toward New York, which guaranteed they wouldn't get there in time. And so this idea that they had to do some kind of a swap because they couldn't rely on the air defense system being hamstrung, that's nonsense. Well, demonstrably, the air defense system was told to stand down. Those hijacked planes flew over 8 United States Air Force bases on their way out to Ohio and back, and not one plane came up to check them out. Now, in contrast, remember when Payne Stewart's Learjet started acting weird because the cabin lost pressure and the crew asphyxiated? They had fighters on that in under 20 minutes.
Absolutely. But the Pentagon also has defense mechanisms. They also have missiles mounted in the ground. They have turrets on the roof. That building can be defended without aircraft.
Yeah, and if the defenses are told to stand down, they will stand down. Remember what that thing about Dick Cheney in the Situation Room, where he's being counted in, plane is coming 30 miles out, 20 miles out, 10 miles out. Sir, have the orders changed? And Cheney says, have you heard me change them? The implication being that the defenses were told to stand down. Anyway, we're almost out of time today, and I'm going to let you go here. But as I mentioned earlier in the show, this no-plane nonsense is deliberately inserted into the discussion so that the corporate media can ridicule the 9/11 truth movement. The corporate media can't talk about the way World Trade Center 7 came down in a controlled demolition. They can't talk about how the BBC announced that the building had collapsed 26 minutes before it happened. They can't deal with the fact that the Secret Service protective detail just let Bush sit there in that school reading about pet goats, proving that they knew he was not a target that day, which means they already knew what the targets were going to be. So this no-plane nonsense is classic poison the well. And I wanted to preemptively derail it because we're already seeing controlled assets try and get it on out there. No plane, no plane, no plane. So the corporate media can say, oh, those tinfoil hat-wearing kooks, they don't think there was a plane at the Pentagon. It's junk. It is nonsense. And you need to recognize when the government and the corporate media are playing these propaganda games with you. And the good news is most of you are now clued into it. And you know when you're being lied to. And, of course, after that whopper about Saddam's weapons of mass destruction, the safe presumption is the government's lying about everything. Look at how Obama lied last week. Tuesday, the NSA isn't spying on American citizens. Friday, yeah, the NSA is spying on American citizens, but we're going to have tighter controls and more transparency. This is a government that rules you through lies, fraud, and deception. And the problem is they've been doing it for so long, they actually don't know how to do anything else. They can't deal with a real crisis like Fukushima or the Gulf of Mexico platform disasters. They can't deal with flooding and hurricanes. They've lived on illusions so long, they can't do anything else except more illusions. And that is the state of the country here right now. And again, for those who are out there pushing that no-plane nonsense, hundreds of eyewitnesses saw the 757 flying towards the Pentagon. In theory, if there was some kind of a dodge, if the 757 had lifted up and over and gone out the other direction, hundreds of eyewitnesses would have seen that as well. unless the Starship Enterprise beamed it up just in time. The government likes to play dirty. Please keep that in mind. All right, there's the music. It's time for us to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We will be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network, and I want to remind everybody again, Republic Broadcasting needs all of your help. The only way we're going to get the big money corruption out of the government and the media is for the little money to unite together in that common cause of restoring the Republic. So please go over to Republic Broadcasting, hit that donate button. We're reaching out to affiliates. We need you to call your local AM and FM stations. If you're buying physical silver and gold, and you should be, please go to the Republic Trading Group because proceeds from those transactions also help fund our network. We need your help. We cannot do it without you. Aloha, America.